The gunshot echoed across the valley as Grace Orwell dove behind a fallen log, heart hammering against her ribs. Blood trickled down her arm where the bullet had grazed her, but she had no time to tend to it. The thundering of hooves told her the men who'd ambushed the stagecoach were coming back to finish what they'd started. It was 1878, and the promise of a teaching position in Colorado Territory had lured Grace from her comfortable home in Boston. 23 years old and full of idealistic notions about bringing education to the frontier, she never imagined her journey would end with her fellow passengers dead and her fleeing for her life. Grace glanced at the steep embankment leading down to Cherry Creek. The rushing water below offered her only chance of escape. Without hesitation, she scrambled over the edge, sliding and tumbling down the rocky slope. Pain shot through her ankle as she landed awkwardly, but there was no time to rest. She could hear the men shouting, their voices growing closer. She went down to the creek. "Get after her!" Plunging into the cold water, Grace began wading downstream, staying close to the bank where overhanging branches provided some cover. The creek wasn't deep, but the current was swift and the rocky bottom treacherous. Her sodden skirts grew heavier with each step, dragging her down, slowing her progress. A mile downstream, exhaustion finally overcame her. Her injured ankle throbbed mercilessly, and the wound on her arm continued to seep blood. With the last of her strength, she dragged herself toward the bank, collapsing in the shallow water, barely able to keep her head above the surface. The world grew dim around her as her fingers clawed at the muddy creek bed. That's when she heard it hoofbeats again, but different this time. Slower, more deliberate. Grace tried to push herself up to continue her desperate flight, but her limbs refused to cooperate. She could only crawl forward through the shallow water, each movement an agony of effort. A shadow fell across her, and she looked up to see a man on horseback. Tall and broad-shouldered, his face partially hidden beneath the brim of a weather-beaten hat, he studied her with startling blue eyes. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the babble of the creek. "They're coming." The stranger dismounted in one fluid motion, his spurs jingling as his boots hit the ground. He knelt beside her, strong hands gentle as they assessed her condition. "You're hurt pretty bad, miss," he said, his voice deep and calm. "I'll carry you out." Without waiting for her response, he reached down and lifted her from the creek. Water streamed from her clothes as he cradled her against his chest. For the first time in hours, Grace felt something other than terror, a strange sense of safety in this stranger's arms. "Thank you," she managed, before darkness claimed her. Cole Ryder had been tracking the Blackwell gang for 3 days when he heard the gunfire in the distance. He'd been hunting these men for months, ruthless outlaws who'd been terrorizing stagecoaches throughout Colorado Territory. As a Deputy U.S. Marshal, it was his job to bring them to justice, but this was personal now. 6 months ago, they'd killed his partner. He hadn't expected to find a half-drowned woman in the creek. The moment he lifted her from the water, Cole knew his priorities had changed. The woman needed immediate care, and from the sound of men searching upstream, her pursuers weren't far behind. Cole gently placed the unconscious woman across his saddle before mounting behind her. He kept one arm firmly around her waist as he guided his horse, Thunder, away from the creek and into the shelter of the pines. His cabin was less than an hour's ride away, hidden in a small valley where few travelers ventured. The woman stirred against him, mumbling something incoherent. Her skin felt hot against his hand, too hot. Fever was setting in fast. "Hold on," he murmured, though he doubted she could hear him. "Just hold on." By the time they reached his cabin, the sun was low in the sky, casting long shadows through the pines. Cole carried the woman inside and laid her gently on his bed. In the better light, he could see her more clearly, honey blonde hair plastered to her pale face, elegant features despite the dirt and scratches, and clothes that spoke of Eastern refinement rather than frontier practicality. Her eyes fluttered open briefly, revealing irises the color of summer grass. "Where am I?" she whispered. "Safe," Cole replied, reaching for a cloth to wipe the mud from her face. "You're safe now. I'm Deputy Marshal Cole Ryder." "Grace," she managed before her eyes closed again. "Grace Orwell." Cole worked quickly, cleaning and bandaging the bullet wound on her arm and wrapping her swollen ankle. The fever worried him. Most wounds like these could turn septic quickly out here, far from doctors and proper medicines. He mixed a tincture of willow bark and herbs, coaxing her to swallow the bitter liquid before she fell into a fitful sleep. Through the night, Cole sat beside her, changing cold compresses on her forehead and watching for signs of worsening infection. By morning, her fever had broken and her breathing had steadied. Relief washed over him as he stepped outside to tend to thunder and gather more firewood. Grace awakened to unfamiliar surroundings: rough-hewn log walls, a stone fireplace, and simple furnishings. For a moment, disorientation gripped her, but then memories flooded back. The stagecoach, the ambush, the desperate flight through the creek, and the man who had saved her. She attempted to sit up, wincing as pain shot through various parts of her body. Her clothes had been replaced by a man's shirt that swallowed her slight frame, and her ankle was tightly wrapped. The door opened, and the man from the creek entered, carrying an armload of firewood. "You're awake," he said, setting down the wood beside the fireplace. "How are you feeling?" "Like I've been trampled by a herd of cattle," Grace replied honestly. "But I believe I owe you my life, Mr. Ryder." The hint of a smile touched his lips. "Just doing my job, Miss Orwell." In the daylight, she could study him properly. He was younger than she'd initially thought, perhaps 30, with sun-bronzed skin and dark hair that curled slightly where it met his collar. A scar ran along his jawline, and his hands bore the calluses of hard work, but there was a gentleness to his movements that belied his rugged appearance. "The men who attacked the stagecoach," Grace began, her voice trembling slightly. "They killed everyone else. The driver, the guard, the other passengers. I only escaped because I was gathering wildflowers when they attacked. I heard the shots and hid." Cole's expression darkened. "The Blackwell gang, I've been tracking them for months. They're wanted for multiple robberies and murders across 3 territories." "I saw their faces," Grace said. "I could identify them." "That's why they were hunting you," Cole nodded. "And that makes you very valuable, Miss Orwell." "But also in grave danger." Grace swallowed hard. "I was traveling to Cherry Creek. I'm to be the schoolteacher there." "Cherry Creek," Cole raised an eyebrow. "That's my jurisdiction. Small world. Will you take me there?" Grace asked. "Once I'm well enough to travel." Cole hesitated. "The Blackwell gang isn't going to give up so easily. They know someone helped you escape. They'll be watching the roads, probably the town too." He stoked the fire, considering. "You'll be safer here until I can bring them to justice." Grace looked around the small cabin. "And how long might that be?" "Hard to say," Cole admitted. "Could be days, could be weeks." The thought of spending weeks in this remote cabin with a man she barely knew should have terrified her, yet strangely it didn't. There was something about Cole Ryder that inspired trust, a steadiness in his gaze, a certainty in his movements. "I don't wish to impose," she said finally. Cole shook his head. "No imposition. But you should know the nearest neighbor is 10 miles away. It's just us out here." He met her gaze directly. "I give you my word as a lawman that you'll be safe with me, but I understand if that's not enough assurance." Grace considered her options, which were admittedly few. She couldn't travel in her condition, and even if she could, the gang would be hunting her. "I trust you, Deputy Ryder," she said at last. "You saved my life. The least I can do is not question your character." A ghost of a smile crossed his face again. "Cole," he said. "Just call me Cole." "Then I'm Grace," she replied. Over the next few days, Grace's strength gradually returned. Her ankle remained painful but was improving, and the wound on her arm was healing cleanly. Cole proved to be an attentive but unobtrusive caretaker, providing her with books from his small collection and fashioning a pair of crutches so she could move about the cabin more easily. She learned that he'd been a U.S. Marshal for 5 years, following in his father's footsteps. Before that, he'd fought in the latter years of the Civil War, though he spoke little of that time. His cabin, while modest, revealed a man of simple but refined taste, shelves lined with books on law, history, and poetry, a chess set carved from dark and light wood, and sketches of landscapes that she discovered he had drawn himself. On the fourth day, when Cole returned from hunting with a brace of rabbits, Grace insisted on cooking dinner. "You've done everything for me," she said firmly. "I'm not completely helpless, you know." Cole looked skeptical. "Can you even stand long enough to cook?" "I'll manage," Grace replied, setting her jaw stubbornly. "Besides, I need to do something useful before I go mad from boredom." He relented with a nod. "Fair enough, but I'll clean and dress the rabbits first." Working together in the small kitchen area, they fell into an easy rhythm. Grace discovered that, despite her privileged upbringing in Boston, she enjoyed the simple task of preparing a meal with ingredients directly from the land. As she chopped wild onions and herbs from Cole's small garden, she told him about her journey west. "My parents weren't pleased," she admitted. "They had plans for me to marry the son of my father's business partner. A suitable match, they said." "And you disagreed?" Cole asked, feeding more wood into the stove. "Edward is a fine man," Grace said, stirring the pot of rabbit stew. "But he wants a wife who will host dinner parties and produce heirs. I want more from life than that." "So you ran away to teach frontier children?" Grace laughed softly. "I suppose it does sound rather dramatic when you put it that way. But I've always wanted to teach, and when I saw the advertisement for a schoolteacher in Cherry Creek, it felt like fate." "And now," Cole asked, "after what happened, are you having second thoughts?" Grace considered the question seriously. "Strangely, no, I'm more determined than ever. Those men tried to take my life, I won't let them take my dreams as well." Cole studied her with newfound respect. "You're braver than most men I know, Grace Orwell." The stew turned out better than either expected, and they ate by lantern light, discussing books they had both read and debating the merits of various authors. Grace discovered that beneath Cole's quiet exterior lay a sharp intellect and surprising wit. "How does a man who quotes Shakespeare end up as a lawman in the Colorado Territory?" she asked as they finished their meal. Cole's expression grew distant. "After the war, I couldn't settle back into city life, too many ghosts." He absently traced the scar along his jaw. "My father was a marshal in Kansas. He taught me that bringing law to lawless places matters, that one person can make a difference." "And has it made a difference?" "Some days I wonder," Cole admitted. "For every outlaw I bring in, two more seem to take his place. But then I see a family living without fear, because the man who threatened them is behind bars, and I know it's worth it." Their eyes met across the table, and something shifted between them, a recognition of kindred spirits despite their different backgrounds. As night fell, Cole insisted that Grace continue to take the bed while he slept on a bedroll near the fireplace. She protested, but he was immovable on this point. "My mother raised me better than to take a lady's bed," he said firmly. "Even when it's actually your bed," Grace countered. His smile was warm in the firelight, especially then. The next morning, Cole announced he needed to ride into Cherry Creek for supplies and to send word to his superiors about the stagecoach attack. "Will you be all right alone for a day?" he asked, checking his pistol before holstering it. Grace nodded, though the thought of being alone in the cabin made her uneasy. "I'll be fine, but please be careful if the Blackwell gang is watching the town." "I know how to avoid being followed," Cole assured her, "and I won't tell anyone you're here. As far as the town knows, I'm still just tracking the gang." After he left, the cabin seemed eerily quiet. Grace busied herself with domestic tasks, finding comfort in the normalcy of sweeping floors and washing dishes. She discovered Cole's journal on a shelf and, after a moment's hesitation, resisted the temptation to read it. Instead, she picked up a volume of Tennyson's poetry, losing herself in the familiar verses. The sudden sound of a branch snapping outside jerked her attention back to the present. Grace froze, listening intently. It could be an animal, she told herself. But when she heard the low murmur of men's voices, her blood turned to ice. Moving as quietly as possible, she grabbed the spare pistol Cole had left for her and positioned herself behind the door, heart pounding. The voices grew closer and she could make out snippets of conversation. Must be the marshal's place. Check inside. Bounty on his head. They weren't looking for her, she realized. They were hunting Cole. Somehow, they'd discovered he was the lawman tracking them and had followed him back toward his cabin. Terror gripped her, not for herself, but for the man who had saved her life. Grace weighed her options quickly. She couldn't fight off multiple armed men with her limited shooting experience. Hiding might work, but if they searched thoroughly, they'd find her. Running was impossible with her injured ankle. A desperate plan formed in her mind. Setting down the pistol, she grabbed her crutches and moved to the fireplace. Using a stick of kindling, she lit several pieces of paper from the embers and dropped them onto the bearskin rug. As smoke began to rise, she grabbed a blanket, wrapped it around herself, and slipped out the back door. The smoke was billowing from the cabin windows by the time the outlaws came into view. 3 rough-looking men with bandanas pulled up over their faces. They stopped short at the sight of the fire. "What the hell?" one of them exclaimed. "Place is burning." "Marshal must have left in a hurry," another said. "Left his fire going." "Let it burn," the third man, clearly the leader, growled. "Saves us the trouble. Let's get back before Ryder returns." As they turned their horses, the leader suddenly spotted Grace, who had deliberately made herself visible at the edge of the clearing. "Hey, there's someone there." Grace didn't wait to hear more. She discarded her crutches and plunged into the underbrush, making as much noise as possible to draw them away from the trail Cole would use to return. Pain shot through her ankle with every step, but fear drove her forward. Behind her, she could hear the men crashing through the forest in pursuit. They were gaining on her quickly. Her injured ankle finally gave out completely as she reached a small ravine, and she tumbled down the slope, landing hard at the bottom. Dazed and in agony, Grace dragged herself toward a fallen log, hoping to hide, but it was too late. The 3 men appeared at the top of the ravine, their expressions triumphant as they spotted her. "Well, well," the leader said, sliding down the slope toward her. "What have we here? A little bird far from her nest." Grace pressed her back against the log, chin raised defiantly despite her fear. "The marshal knows I'm here. He'll be back any minute," the outlaw laughed. "Nice try, sweetheart. Ryder's in town. We just saw him there." He studied her face, recognition dawning. "Wait a minute. You're that woman from the stagecoach, the one who got away." "Blackwell's gonna want to deal with her personal," one of the other men said. The leader nodded. "Tie her up. We'll take her back to camp." As the men approached, a shot rang out, echoing through the ravine. The leader dropped to his knees, clutching his shoulder. Before the others could react, 2 more shots followed in quick succession. One outlaw fell, while the third dove for cover. "Drop your weapon," Cole's voice commanded from somewhere above them. "You're surrounded." The remaining outlaw hesitated, then threw down his gun. "Don't shoot, I surrender." Cole appeared at the top of the ravine, rifle in hand, his expression cold with fury. Another man Grace didn't recognize stood beside him, also armed. "Sheriff Miller," Cole called to his companion. "Take this trash into custody. I'll see to the lady." Grace felt tears of relief spring to her eyes as Cole made his way down to her. He knelt beside her, concern etched on his features as he gently examined her re-injured ankle. "Are you hurt anywhere else?" he asked, his voice tight with worry. "No," she managed. "But your cabin, I had to set a fire to draw them out." "I'm so sorry." "Hush," Cole said, gathering her carefully into his arms. "Cabins can be rebuilt, you can't." As he carried her up the ravine, Grace whispered, "How did you know? How did you find me?" "I saw the smoke from the trail," Cole explained. "And I ran into Sheriff Miller in town. He told me he'd spotted 3 of the Blackwell gang heading this way. We rode back as fast as we could." His arms tightened around her. "I should never have left you alone." "You couldn't have known," Grace said, resting her head against his shoulder, suddenly exhausted. And I'm still here thanks to you. Again. Back at the clearing, the cabin fire had burned itself out, leaving the structure damaged but not destroyed. Sheriff Miller had the two surviving outlaws bound and secured to their horses. "I'll take these two back to Cherry Creek," the sheriff said. "The doc can see to that one's shoulder before we lock them up. Blackwell won't be happy to lose 3 of his men." Cole nodded. "I appreciate the help, Tom. Tell the doc I'll be bringing in an injured lady tomorrow. And send word to Judge Parker that we need him to ride circuit early. I want these men to stand trial as soon as possible." After the sheriff departed with his prisoners, Cole helped Grace onto Thunder before mounting behind her. "We'll stay at the line shack tonight," he said. "It's small, but it's dry and safe." The line shack proved to be little more than a one-room shelter used by cattle hands during seasonal roundups, but it offered protection from the elements. Cole quickly built a fire in the small stove and made a pallet from blankets he'd salvaged from his cabin. As night fell, they shared the last of his jerky and a can of peaches. Grace's ankle throbbed painfully, but Cole fashioned a cold compress from his bandana and creek water that brought some relief. "Those men," Grace said as Cole checked her earlier wound for signs of infection. "They mentioned someone named Blackwell. Is he their leader?" Cole nodded grimly. "Nate Blackwell, most dangerous outlaw in 3 territories. He was a Confederate guerrilla during the war, and he brought all those skills west afterward. He's smart, ruthless, and holds a grudge." "And now he has a grudge against me," Grace said quietly. "He has a grudge against both of us," Cole corrected. "But after today, he's down to just 4 men. The odds are shifting in our favor." Grace studied his face in the lantern light. "You're not telling me everything. There's something personal between you and this Blackwell, isn't there?" Cole was silent for a long moment. "My partner," he finally said. "Frank Johnson, best marshal I ever knew. Blackwell shot him in the back 6 months ago during a bank robbery in Pueblo." His hands clenched into fists. Frank had a wife and 2 young children. Grace reached out, covering his hand with hers. "I'm sorry." The simple touch seemed to anchor him. Cole turned his hand to hold hers, his grip firm but gentle. "After tomorrow, you'll be safe in Cherry Creek. The town has a sheriff and deputies. Blackwell wouldn't dare attack there. And you?" Grace asked, "Will you continue hunting him alone?" "It's my job," Cole said simply. "It's suicide," Grace countered. "Even you said how dangerous he is." Their eyes locked in silent battle of wills. Finally, Cole sighed. "I'll request additional marshals from the territorial office. Frank deserves justice, but he wouldn't want me to die seeking it." Relief flooded through Grace. "Thank you." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, hands still joined. Outside, an owl hooted softly, and the wind rustled through the pines. Despite the danger they'd faced, despite her injuries and the uncertain future, Grace felt a strange contentment in this moment. "Tell me about Cherry Creek," she said. "What are the people like? The children I'll be teaching?" Cole smiled, and the tension seemed to drain from his shoulders. "Good people, mostly. Hardworking. The town started as a mining settlement but has grown into something more stable. There's about 60 children of school age, some from the town, others from ranches nearby." "And where do you live when you're not tracking outlaws?" "I have a small house on the edge of town," Cole said. "Nothing fancy, but it has a good view of the mountains." "Do you ever get lonely?" The question slipped out before Grace could consider its propriety. If Cole was surprised by her directness, he didn't show it. "Sometimes," he admitted. "The job keeps me moving a lot, doesn't leave much room for putting down roots." He looked at her curiously. "What about you? Won't you be lonely in a new town where you don't know anyone?" "I've been surrounded by people my entire life, family, servants, society, and felt completely alone," Grace replied. "I've learned that loneliness has little to do with how many people are around you." Cole nodded slowly. "That's true enough." They talked long into the night, sharing stories from their lives: Cole's childhood on the Kansas frontier, Grace's education at a prestigious girls' school, their shared love of literature and music. With each revelation, the connection between them deepened. transcending their different backgrounds and experiences. When Grace finally drifted off to sleep on the makeshift pallet, Cole kept watch beside her, his hand never far from his pistol. He studied her face in repose, marveling at the courage and resilience housed in such a delicate frame. Something was happening to him, something unexpected and powerful. In just a few days, this woman had come to matter to him in ways he couldn't fully comprehend. The next morning brought clear skies and the promise of a safe journey to Cherry Creek. Cole had fashioned a better splint for Grace's ankle, and though it was still painful, she could put some weight on it with the help of a walking stick he'd carved for her. The ride to town took most of the morning. As they crested the final hill, Cherry Creek came into view, a bustling settlement nestled in a valley with a creek running through its center. Wooden buildings lined the main street, and a white church steeple rose above the surrounding structures. In the distance, snow-capped mountains provided a majestic backdrop. "It's beautiful," Grace breathed. "Welcome to your new home," Cole said, a note of pride in his voice. They drew curious glances as they rode down the main street, Cole's arms around Grace as she sat before him on Thunder. He guided the horse directly to a two-story building with a sign identifying it as Dr. Lawrence Caldwell, physician and surgeon. The doctor proved to be a kindly man in his 50s who clicked his tongue sympathetically as he examined Grace's injuries. "You've had quite an ordeal, young lady," he said, rewrapping her ankle, "but Deputy Ryder took good care of these wounds. Another week or two, and you should be back on your feet properly." "Thank you, doctor," Grace said. "I don't suppose you know when I'm expected to begin teaching." "I was due to arrive yesterday." "Ah, yes, you must be our new school teacher," Dr. Caldwell smiled. "The school board chairman is my brother-in-law. Don't worry about starting right away, the children are still helping with harvest." Classes weren't scheduled to begin until the 1st of October, so you have 2 weeks to settle in. Relief washed over Grace. That's wonderful news. After leaving the doctor's office, Cole took Grace to the town's only hotel, a respectable establishment run by a widow named Mrs. Henderson. The older woman fussed over Grace immediately, promising to send up a hot bath and fresh clothes loaned from her daughter. "I'll need to report to the sheriff and send telegrams," Cole told Grace as Mrs. Henderson showed them to a comfortable corner room. "Will you be all right here?" "I'll be fine," Grace assured him. "Go do what you need to do." Before he left, Cole hesitated, then reached into his pocket and pressed something into her hand, a small Derringer pistol. "Keep this with you," he said quietly, "just in case." The weight of the weapon was both frightening and reassuring. "Thank you," she whispered. As promised, Mrs. Henderson soon arrived with 2 young maids carrying a hip bath and buckets of steaming water. The clean clothes she brought were simple, but well made: a blue calico dress, undergarments, and a shawl. After a blissful soak that washed away days of grime and fear, Grace felt reborn. She was brushing her freshly washed hair when a knock came at the door. Remembering Cole's warning, she tucked the Derringer into her pocket before calling, "Who is it?" "It's me, Grace," Cole's voice answered. She opened the door to find him standing there with a covered tray. "I thought you might be hungry," he said. Over a simple but delicious meal of roast chicken, potatoes, and apple pie, Cole updated her on the situation. "Sheriff's holding the 2 outlaws securely. I've sent telegrams to the territorial governor and the U.S. Marshal's office requesting additional lawmen. Judge Parker will be here in 3 days to hold a preliminary hearing." "What about Blackwell?" Grace asked. Cole's expression darkened. "No sign of him yet, but he'll come for his men or send someone to silence them before they can testify." He took a sip of coffee. "The good news is that with these arrests and your witness testimony, we can put most of the gang away for good. Even Blackwell once we catch him." "When will you want my statement?" Grace asked. "Tomorrow will be soon enough," Cole said. "You need rest tonight." He hesitated, then added, "I've arranged for a deputy to stand guard outside your door tonight, just as a precaution." The concern in his eyes touched her deeply. "Thank you for everything," Cole nodded, suddenly looking uncomfortable. I should let you get some sleep. He rose to leave, then paused. The school board would like to meet you tomorrow afternoon if you're feeling up to it. I told them about your ankle, but they're eager to welcome you to town. I'll be ready, Grace promised. After Cole left, Grace moved to the window, looking out at the town that would be her home. Lamps were being lit along the main street as twilight descended, and the distant sound of a piano drifted up from the saloon down the block. So different from Boston, yet somehow already feeling more like home than the city of her birth ever had. Perhaps it was the frontier spirit of independence and possibility that appealed to her. Or perhaps, she admitted to herself, it was the presence of a certain deputy marshal whose blue eyes seemed to see into her very soul. The next morning brought a flurry of activity. Word had spread quickly about the new schoolteacher's harrowing journey, and several town ladies came to call, bringing gifts of food, books, and offers of friendship. By noon, Grace had met the mayor's wife, the banker's daughter, and assorted other prominent women of Cherry Creek. Cole arrived just after midday to escort her to the sheriff's office to give her statement. Sheriff Miller proved to be a thorough but kind interviewer, taking detailed notes as Grace recounted everything she remembered about the stagecoach attack and the men responsible. "You've got a good memory for detail, Miss Orwell," the sheriff said, impressed. "This will be very helpful when the case goes to trial." "When will that be?" Grace asked. "Judge Parker works quickly," Cole said. "Once he holds the preliminary hearing and finds probable cause, which he will, with your testimony he'll likely set trial for within the month." "And I'll need to testify." "Yes," Cole nodded, "but you won't be alone, I'll be there." Something in his voice made her look up, meeting his gaze. There was a promise there that went beyond professional duty. In just a few days, this man had become her protector, her confidant, and something more, something neither of them had yet put into words. The meeting with the school board went equally well. The 5 members, including the mayor, the banker, and 3 prominent ranchers, were impressed by Grace's educational credentials and her obvious passion for teaching. They showed her the schoolhouse, a tidy one-room building with new desks and a small library, and presented her with the key to the teacher's cottage just behind it. "It's not much," Mayor Collins said apologetically, "but it's furnished and has its own well." The previous teacher, Miss Wilson, left everything in good order when she married that cattle buyer from Denver. "It's perfect," Grace said sincerely, looking around the cozy 2-room cottage with its neat kitchen, comfortable bed, and small sitting area with a desk and bookshelves. "You'll start with 38 pupils," Mrs. Baker, the banker's wife, explained. "Ages 6 to 16. Some of the older boys only come when farm work allows, but they're eager learners when they're here." As the school board members left, Mayor Collins pulled Cole aside for a quiet conversation, while Mrs. Baker helped Grace arrange her few belongings in the cottage. "The deputy marshal is quite handsome," Mrs. Baker observed with a knowing smile. "And unmarried, I might add." Grace felt her cheeks warm. "He saved my life. I'm very grateful to him." "Of course, dear," Mrs. Baker patted her hand. "Just grateful. I understand completely." When they were finally alone, Cole explained the conversation with the mayor. "The town council has voted to hire additional deputies temporarily, given the threat posed by the Blackwell gang. I'll be staying in Cherry Creek for the foreseeable future, coordinating with the U.S. Marshal's office." "That's good news," Grace said, then quickly amended, "for the town's safety, I mean." A hint of a smile touched Cole's lips. "Of course." "Will you be staying at the hotel?" she asked. "No, I'll be at my house at the edge of town." He pointed out the window toward a small house visible on a rise about a quarter-mile away. Close enough to respond quickly if needed. Over the next 2 weeks, Grace settled into life in Cherry Creek. Her ankle healed enough for her to walk without the cane, though she still favored it slightly. She prepared the schoolhouse for the start of classes, visited the homes of several students, and gradually became part of the community. Cole was a constant presence, though always properly respectful of her reputation. He escorted her to church on Sundays, occasionally joined her for dinner at the hotel restaurant, and made sure she had everything she needed for her cottage and classroom. If the townspeople noticed the growing attachment between them, most approved a schoolteacher, and a lawman made a respectable match. The preliminary hearing before Judge Parker went exactly as predicted. With Grace's testimony and the confessions of the two captured outlaws who hoped for leniency, the judge ordered a trial to begin in 3 weeks' time. The men were transferred to the more secure jail in Denver to await trial, with a contingent of U.S. Marshals as escorts. "One step closer to justice," Cole told Grace as they walked back from the courthouse. "But Blackwell is still out there and he's gone to ground. None of our informants can find a trace of him." "Perhaps he's fled the territory," Grace suggested hopefully. Cole shook his head. "He won't run. Not with 2 of his men facing the gallows. He's planning something, I can feel it." The day before classes were to begin, Grace was putting the finishing touches on the schoolhouse when Cole arrived with a small wrapped package. "A gift for the teacher," he said with a rare, full smile. Grace unwrapped it to find a beautiful brass bell with a wooden handle. "For calling the children to class," Cole explained. "I noticed the old one was cracked. It's perfect," Grace said, deeply touched by his thoughtfulness. "Thank you." As they stood together in the late afternoon light filtering through the schoolhouse windows, the atmosphere between them changed subtly. Cole stepped closer, his eyes never leaving hers. "Grace," he said softly, "these past weeks, getting to know you." He paused, searching for words. "I've never met anyone like you. Your courage, your kindness, your determination." "Cole," she interrupted gently, "are you courting me?" His startled laugh broke the tension. "I'm trying to, rather badly it seems." Grace smiled, her heart suddenly light. "You're doing fine." Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, Cole leaned down and kissed her. His lips were warm and gentle against hers, and Grace found herself responding with a passion that surprised them both. When they finally parted, Cole rested his forehead against hers. "I should have asked permission first," he murmured. "Yes, you should have," Grace agreed, then pulled him back for another kiss. "But I forgive you." The next morning, Grace rang her new bell to call her students to class for the first time. The children filed in, some shy, some boisterous, all curious about their new teacher from the East. Her ankle ached slightly as she stood to welcome them, but her heart was full as she looked at the eager young faces before her. "Good morning, children," she began. "I'm Miss Orwell, and I'm very happy to be your teacher." The day passed in a blur of lessons, getting to know her pupils and establishing classroom routines. When the last child had gone home, Grace sank into her chair with a contented sigh. This was what she had come west for, the opportunity to make a difference in these children's lives. A shadow fell across her desk, and she looked up to see Cole standing in the doorway, his expression grave. "What is it?" she asked, immediately sensing something was wrong. "A telegram from Denver," Cole said, holding out a piece of paper. "The prisoners never arrived. The transport was ambushed yesterday in Mountain Pass. 2 marshals killed, 1 wounded. The prisoners were taken." Grace felt the blood drain from her face. "Blackwell?" Cole nodded grimly. "Has to be. No one else would dare attack a U.S. Marshal transport." He moved to her side. "Grace, I need you to pack a bag, just essentials. You're not safe here anymore." "Where will we go?" she asked, rising quickly. "There's an army fort 60 miles north," Cole explained. "I've wired ahead. They're expecting us." "When do we leave?" "Now, tonight. I have horses ready." Grace didn't question him. She hurried to her cottage and packed a small carpet bag with clothing, her journal, and the derringer Cole had given her. Within an hour, they were riding out of Cherry Creek, accompanied by Sheriff Miller and 2 deputies. "We'll take the Ridge Trail," Cole told the group as they left town. "It's harder going, but less likely to be ambushed." They rode through the night, pushing the horses as hard as they dared on the rough terrain. By dawn, They had covered nearly 30 miles and stopped briefly to rest the animals and eat a cold breakfast. "We should reach the fort by nightfall if we keep this pace," Sheriff Miller said, studying a map. As they prepared to mount up again, one of the deputies who'd been keeping watch called out, "Riders coming, at least 6 of them." Cole's reaction was immediate. "Positions, Grace, stay down." The lawmen spread out, taking cover behind rocks and fallen logs. Grace crouched behind a large boulder, the derringer clutched in her trembling hand. The approaching riders came into view, 7 men, riding hard with rifles ready. "That's Blackwell in the lead," Cole murmured beside her. "And those are my former prisoners with him." Sheriff Miller called out, "U.S. Marshal, throw down your weapons." The response was a volley of gunfire. Bullets pinged off rocks and kicked up dirt around them. The sheriff returned fire, as did the deputies. Cole fired with deadly precision, and one of the outlaws tumbled from his saddle. "They're trying to flank us," Cole warned. "Miller, watch the left." The gunfight intensified. One of the deputies cried out as a bullet found its mark, and he slumped behind his cover. Blackwell's men were advancing steadily, using the terrain to their advantage. Grace watched in horror as one outlaw crept around behind Sheriff Miller's position. Without thinking, she raised the derringer and fired. The man jerked and fell, clutching his leg. The sheriff turned at the sound, spotted the wounded outlaw, and quickly disarmed him. "Good shot," Cole said, giving her a quick, grim smile before returning his attention to the battle. The firefight continued for what seemed like hours but was probably only minutes. Another of Blackwell's men fell, and one of the deputies was wounded in the shoulder. Then suddenly, the outlaws began to retreat, firing as they went. "They're pulling back," Sheriff Miller said, surprised. "Why would they?" His question was answered by the sound of hoofbeats from the north, many hoofbeats. Over the ridge appeared a troop of U.S. cavalry, their blue uniforms unmistakable in the morning light. "The fort must have sent out a patrol when they got my telegram," Cole said, relief evident in his voice. As the cavalry approached, the retreating outlaws scattered in different directions. The cavalry officer, a young lieutenant, saluted Cole as he reined in his horse. "Deputy Marshal Ryder." "Lieutenant James Foster, Fort Collins. We received your wire about a potential threat and were dispatched to escort you in." "Your timing is impeccable, Lieutenant," Cole replied. "We've got wounded men here who need attention." "We have a wagon and a medic," the lieutenant assured him, then spotted Grace. "Is this the witness you mentioned in your telegram, Miss Grace Orwell?" Cole confirmed. "She's under my protection." With the cavalry's assistance, they tended to the wounded and secured the 2 outlaws who had been captured, one shot by Grace's derringer, the other seriously wounded by Cole's rifle. The dead were respectfully covered and loaded into the wagon. "Blackwell got away," Sheriff Miller said grimly as they prepared to continue to the fort, along with 3 of his men. "For now," Cole agreed, "but his gang is decimated and we have more prisoners who can testify against him. His days are numbered." The journey to Fort Collins continued without further incident. The military outpost was larger than Grace had expected, a substantial complex of wooden buildings surrounded by a high stockade. The commanding officer, Colonel Harrington, welcomed them and immediately assigned them secure quarters. "The trial has been rescheduled for next week in Denver," the colonel informed them. "Judge Parker is determined to proceed despite the attack. In the meantime, you'll be safe here. Blackwell would have to be insane to attack a military installation." Grace was given a small but comfortable room in the officers' quarters, while Cole and Sheriff Miller were housed nearby. After a hot meal in the mess hall, Grace retreated to her room, exhaustion finally catching up with her. She had just changed into a nightgown provided by the colonel's wife when a soft knock came at her door. "Who is it?" she called, reaching for her robe. "It's Cole." She opened the door to find him standing there, his face haggard with fatigue but his eyes alert. "I wanted to make sure you were all right," he said. "I'm fine," she assured him. "Just tired," Cole nodded. You were very brave today. That shot you took saved Sheriff Miller's life. Grace shuddered at the memory. I've never shot anyone before. I hope you never have to again, Cole said solemnly. I never wanted this life for you, Grace. You didn't choose it for me, she reminded him. Fate did that, but I don't regret coming west, even with everything that's happened. She reached for his hand. I've found purpose here. And I've found you, Cole's expression softened. When this is over, when Blackwell is behind bars or in the ground, I want to court you properly. No danger, no running, just a man and a woman getting to know each other in peacetime. I'd like that, Grace said softly. He lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. Get some rest. I'll be right next door if you need anything. The week at Fort Collins passed slowly but peacefully. Grace helped the post-school teacher with the soldiers' children, finding joy in returning to her calling even under such unusual circumstances. Cole and Sheriff Miller worked with the cavalry to search for Blackwell, but the outlaw had vanished like smoke. The evening before they were to leave for Denver, Colonel Harrington hosted a dinner in the officers' mess. The atmosphere was surprisingly festive, with the regimental band playing and the colonel's wife ensuring every detail was perfect. We don't get many ladies at the fort, the colonel explained to Grace. My wife has been delighted to have your company. Grace wore a borrowed dress, a lovely blue silk that Mrs. Harrington had altered to fit her, and found herself the center of attention among the officers. Cole, looking handsome in a clean black suit rather than his usual trail clothes, watched with a mixture of pride and amusement as she charmed the entire room. After dinner, as the band played a waltz, Cole approached her. May I have this dance, Miss Orwell? He asked formally, offering his hand. Grace placed her hand in his. You may, Deputy Marshal Ryder. As he led her onto the small dance floor, his hand warm at her waist, Grace was surprised by his graceful movements. You dance very well, she commented. I wouldn't have expected a frontier lawman to be so accomplished. Cole smiled. My mother insisted, said a gentleman should know how to dance properly, no matter where he lives. His expression grew nostalgic. She was the daughter of a Virginia plantation owner who married my father for love and followed him to the Kansas frontier. Never complained about the hardships, but she made sure we maintained certain standards. She sounds like a remarkable woman. She was, Cole agreed. She would have liked you very much. They danced in comfortable silence for a while, the music and the moment creating a bubble of peace around them. It was easy to forget, just for this dance, the danger that still lurked beyond the fort's walls. Colonel Harrington says we'll have a cavalry escort all the way to Denver, Cole said as the music ended. 20 troopers. Blackwell would be a fool to try anything. Do you think he will? Grace asked as they walked onto the veranda for some fresh air. Cole considered his answer carefully. Blackwell is many things, but he's not a fool. He won't attack a cavalry detachment directly, but he's desperate now, and desperate men are unpredictable. The journey to Denver the next day was tense but uneventful. The cavalry escort maintained a vigilant watch, and the stagecoach carrying Grace, Cole, and Sheriff Miller made good time on the well-traveled road. By nightfall, they were safely ensconced in one of Denver's finest hotels, with guards posted in the hallway. The trial began the following morning in the territorial courthouse. Grace found herself testifying before a packed courtroom, recounting once more the horrors of the stagecoach attack and her subsequent ordeal. Cole sat in the front row, his steady presence giving her strength when her voice threatened to falter. The 4 captured members of the Blackwell gang were convicted on all counts and sentenced to hang. Judge Parker addressed the court after pronouncing sentence. Let it be known throughout this territory that the law will prevail. To Nathan Blackwell, if you are hearing of these proceedings, turn yourself in or suffer the same fate as your accomplices. There is nowhere in this land where the long arm of the law cannot reach. As they left the courthouse, Cole kept Grace close, his eyes constantly scanning the crowds. It's not over, he said quietly, not while Blackwell is still free. What happens now? Grace asked. You return to Cherry Creek with a protective detail, Cole said. The children need their teacher. And you? Cole's jaw tightened. I continue the hunt for Blackwell. Grace stopped walking, forcing him to turn and look at her. Alone, after everything we've been through, this is my job, Grace, my duty. And what about us? She demanded. Is that just something to consider after your duty is done? Cole's expression softened. You know it's more than that. Then don't push me away now, Grace insisted. I'm not asking to join your manhunt. I'm asking you not to disappear into the wilderness for months on end while I wait and wonder if you're alive or dead. A passing couple glanced at them curiously, and Cole gently guided Grace to a quieter spot beneath a tree. You're right, he said finally. I've been alone so long, I'm not used to considering someone else's feelings. He took her hands in his. I'll base my search out of Cherry Creek, check in regularly, and I'll accept help from other lawmen instead of trying to do everything myself. That's all I ask, Grace said, relief washing through her. They returned to Cherry Creek the next day, accompanied by 2 U.S. Marshals who would remain in town until Blackwell was captured. Life gradually returned to normal. Grace taught her classes, became more involved in community activities, and continued to develop friendships with the townspeople. Cole kept his promise, using Cherry Creek as his base of operations and never staying away more than a week at a time. When in town, he became a regular visitor to the schoolhouse, sometimes joining Grace for lunch or walking her home in the evenings. Their courtship progressed slowly but steadily, conducted under the approving eyes of the community. 3 months after the trial, on a crisp December evening, Cole invited Grace to dinner at his home. It was the first time she had visited his house, and she was charmed by the simple but comfortable furnishings, the well-stocked bookshelves, and the magnificent view of the mountains from his back porch. Cole had prepared dinner himself, a surprisingly delicious venison stew with freshly baked bread he'd obtained from the hotel restaurant. After they ate, he built up the fire and joined her on the small sofa. Any news of Blackwell? Grace asked. It had become their custom to address business matters first, then put them aside for the evening. Nothing definite, Cole admitted. There was a report of someone matching his description in Wyoming territory, but it came to nothing. He took her hand. But that's not why I asked you here tonight. Grace's heart quickened at his serious tone. Oh, Cole took a deep breath. When I found you in that creek, half drowned and fighting for your life, something happened to me, something I wasn't looking for and certainly wasn't expecting. His blue eyes held hers intently. I fell in love with your courage before I even knew your name, and every day since, I've found more reasons to love you. Grace felt tears spring to her eyes as Cole reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. I know it's only been a few months, he continued, but when you find what matters most in life, time becomes irrelevant. He opened the box to reveal a delicate gold ring with a small but perfect diamond. Grace Orwell, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Joy unlike anything she had ever known surged through Grace. Yes, she whispered. Yes, Cole Ryder, I will marry you. The kiss that followed sealed their promise to one another, tender at first, then deepening with all the emotion they had held in check for so long. When they finally parted, Cole slipped the ring onto her finger where it fit perfectly. My mother's, he explained. I sent to Kansas for it last month. My father gave it to her when they decided to build a life together on the frontier. It's beautiful, Grace said, admiring how the diamond caught the firelight. And knowing its history makes it all the more precious. They spent the evening planning their future together, a spring wedding in the Cherry Creek church, a honeymoon trip to San Francisco, and eventually, children to fill the rooms of Cole's house. It was well past midnight when Cole finally escorted Grace back to her cottage, reluctant to say goodnight but mindful of her reputation. News of their engagement spread quickly through Cherry Creek, generating universal approval and a flurry of congratulatory visitors. The school board granted Grace's request for a 2-week wedding trip in April, and the town ladies immediately began planning a wedding celebration worthy of their beloved schoolteacher and respected lawman. January brought heavy snows that temporarily halted Cole's search for Blackwell. He used the time to expand his house, adding 2 rooms in anticipation of their future family. Grace spent her evenings sewing her wedding dress with help from Mrs. Baker and other ladies of the town. As winter gave way to spring, the threat of Blackwell seemed to recede. Reports placed him in Montana territory, apparently having abandoned any plans for revenge. Cole remained vigilant, but allowed himself to hope that perhaps the outlaw had finally moved on. 2 weeks before their wedding, as Grace was dismissing her class for the day, an unfamiliar man appeared in the schoolhouse doorway. Tall and lean, with graying hair and cold eyes, he watched silently as the last children filed past him. "Can I help you, sir?" Grace asked, immediately wary. Something about the man raised the hairs on the back of her neck. "You're the schoolteacher," he said, his voice oddly soft for such an imposing figure. "Miss Orwell, isn't it?" Grace nodded cautiously, acutely aware that she was alone in the schoolhouse. "And you are?" The man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Just a traveler passing through, heard there was a wedding coming up. The schoolteacher and the lawman, quite the romantic tale." Grace moved toward her desk, where the derringer lay in the top drawer. "Yes, Deputy Marshal Ryder and I are to be married soon." "Ryder," the man repeated, stepping further into the room. "Cole Ryder, we're old acquaintances, him and I." Sudden understanding dawned on Grace. "You're Blackwell." His smile widened. "My reputation precedes me." Grace's hand closed around the derringer in her desk drawer. "What do you want?" "Just to pay my respects to the bride," Blackwell said, advancing slowly, "and to leave a message for the groom." Before he could come closer, the schoolhouse door burst open again. Sheriff Miller stood there, pistol drawn. "Step away from the lady, Blackwell," he commanded. Blackwell froze, then slowly raised his hands. "Sheriff Miller, this is a surprise." "Not really," the sheriff said grimly. "We've had lookouts posted ever since you were spotted in Pueblo 3 days ago." "Did you really think you could just walk into town unnoticed?" More men appeared behind the sheriff deputies and townsmen, all armed. Blackwell's eyes darted around, calculating, but he clearly recognized the futility of resistance. "Where's Ryder?" he asked. "I expected him to be the one to greet me." "He's in Denver, testifying at another trial," Sheriff Miller said. "He'll be mighty disappointed to have missed you." He gestured with his pistol. "Now move nice and slow. You've got a date with a jail cell." As the men led Blackwell away, Grace sank into her chair, her legs suddenly unable to support her. Sheriff Miller stayed behind, concern etched on his weathered face. "Are you all right, Miss Orwell? He didn't threaten you." "I'm fine," Grace assured him, though her voice trembled slightly. "He didn't have the chance to do anything." "Good," the sheriff nodded. "I've sent a telegram to Cole. He'll be on the first train back tomorrow morning." True to the sheriff's prediction, Cole arrived on the early train, bursting into Grace's cottage before she had even finished her breakfast. He gathered her into his arms, holding her as if he feared she might vanish. "When I got Miller's telegram saying Blackwell had approached you," he couldn't finish the sentence, burying his face in her hair instead. "I'm fine," Grace soothed, running her hands along his back. "Truly." The sheriff arrived before anything happened. Cole pulled back enough to look at her face, as if verifying for himself that she was unharmed. "I should have been here." "You had a duty to fulfill," Grace reminded him, "and the sheriff had everything well in hand." She smiled. "Besides, I had my derringer ready." A reluctant smile tugged at Cole's lips. "My brave Grace." He kissed her softly, then more urgently, the fear of what might have happened fueling his passion. When they finally parted, Grace asked, "What will happen to Blackwell now?" "Judge Parker is already on his way," Cole said. "With the previous convictions of his gang and the outstanding warrants for Blackwell himself, there's no question of the outcome. He'll hang within the month." "And then it will truly be over," Grace said. Cole nodded, his expression lightening. Just in time for our wedding. The trial of Nathan Blackwell was swift and decisive. With overwhelming evidence and multiple eyewitnesses, the verdict was never in doubt. Judge Parker sentenced him to hang on April 10th, 1 week before Cole and Grace's wedding. On the morning of the execution, Cole attended in his official capacity as a U.S. Marshal. Grace remained at the schoolhouse, having no desire to witness even a lawful death. As Blackwell stood on the gallows, he requested a final word with Cole. "You won, Ryder," the outlaw said, his voice low enough that only Cole could hear. "Fair and square. But you should know it was never just business with me and your partner Johnson. He was on my payroll, taking money to look the other way. When he tried to double-cross me, I did what needed doing." Cole's blood ran cold. "You're lying," Blackwell laughed softly. "Am I? Check his bank accounts in Denver. Ask yourself why he always insisted on working alone in certain towns. The evidence is there if you want to find it." Before Cole could respond, the hangman placed the hood over Blackwell's head, and moments later, justice was carried out. Cole walked away from the gallows, Blackwell's final words echoing in his mind. That evening, as Grace prepared dinner in her cottage, she sensed something was troubling Cole. He was quieter than usual, distracted. "What is it?" she finally asked, sitting beside him on the small sofa. "Did something happen at the execution?" Cole hesitated, then shared what Blackwell had claimed about Frank Johnson. "It's probably just a final attempt to cause pain," he concluded. "Blackwell was a manipulator to the end." Grace took his hands in hers. "But you're not sure?" "No," Cole admitted. "Frank and I were partners, but there were times." He shook his head. "It doesn't matter now, he's gone, and so is Blackwell." "It does matter," Grace said gently. "Not to the cases or the law, but to you. Frank was your friend." Cole looked at her with profound gratitude. "How did I get so lucky to find someone who understands me so well?" "You carried me out of a creek," Grace reminded him with a smile. "That tends to create a bond." His laughter broke the tension, and Cole pulled her into his arms. "Let's not talk about the past anymore tonight. The future is what matters now, our future." The wedding of Deputy U.S. Marshal Cole Ryder and Miss Grace Orwell took place on April 17, 1879, in the Cherry Creek Church. The entire town turned out for the celebration, filling the small church to capacity and spilling out onto the steps. Grace wore a gown of ivory silk with lace her mother had sent from Boston, and Cole looked handsome in a new black suit. As they spoke their vows before Reverend Thomas, Grace thought of the journey that had brought her to this moment, the stagecoach attack that should have ended her life, the desperate crawl through the creek, and the man who had reached down to carry her to safety. What had begun in violence and fear had transformed into something beautiful and enduring. Their wedding trip to San Francisco was everything they had hoped for 2 weeks of exploration, discovery, and deepening love. They visited the bustling harbor, attended the theater, and walked hand in hand along beaches unlike anything Grace had seen in her East Coast childhood. In the privacy of their hotel suite, they discovered each other as husband and wife, their passion tempered by tenderness and mutual respect. Upon their return to Cherry Creek, they settled into married life with surprising ease. Grace continued teaching, now as Mrs. Ryder, while Cole balanced his duties as a marshal with more time at home. They hosted dinner parties for friends, became godparents to Sheriff Miller's new grandson, and worked together on community projects like the town library. In the fall, Cole received a letter from the U.S. Marshal's office in Denver, offering him the position of Chief Marshal for the Eastern District of Colorado Territory. The promotion would mean less traveling but more administrative work, based permanently in Cherry Creek. "It's your decision," Grace said when he showed her the letter. "I know how much you value being in the field." Cole shook his head. "There was a time when the hunt was everything to me, but now—" He drew her into his arms. "Now I have something more important waiting for me at home." He accepted the promotion, and they celebrated with a small dinner party for their closest friends. As winter approached again, Grace had news of her own to share. One evening, as they sat together before the fire in their expanded home, Grace took Cole's hand and placed it gently on her stomach. "I visited Dr. Caldwell today," she said, her eyes shining. "We're going to have a baby in the spring." Joy unlike anything Cole had ever known washed over him. He gathered Grace into his arms, his voice thick with emotion as he whispered, "Thank you for everything, for our life together, for this child, for being the woman I found in that creek." "I think I'm the one who should be thanking you," Grace countered. "You're the one who carried me out, remember?" Cole smiled, resting his forehead against hers. "And I'd do it all again in a heartbeat." On a perfect May morning in 1880, Grace gave birth to a healthy baby boy they named Thomas Franklin Ryder. As Cole held his son for the first time, looking down at the tiny face with Grace's green eyes and his dark hair, he marveled at how completely his life had changed in just 2 years. "He's perfect," he whispered, carefully returning the baby to Grace's arms. "He is," she agreed, her face radiant despite her exhaustion, "and he's just the beginning of our family." Cole sat on the edge of the bed, his arm around his wife and new son. "I love you, Grace Ryder, more than I ever thought possible." "And I love you," Grace replied, leaning against his shoulder. "My hero who reached down and carried me out of the creek." Outside their window, Cherry Creek continued its constant flow toward the distant horizon, much like the journey that had brought them together, beginning in danger and desperation, transforming into love and hope, and continuing on toward a future bright with promise. Over the years that followed, their family grew with the addition of twin girls, Emma and Elizabeth, born in 1882, and another son, James, who arrived in 1885. The Ryder home became known throughout Cherry Creek as a place of warmth and welcome, with Grace's teaching extending beyond the schoolhouse to include community classes for adults eager to improve their education. Cole served as chief marshal with distinction until Colorado achieved statehood, at which point he was appointed a federal judge, a position that allowed him to ensure justice was served while keeping him close to home and family. The lessons he had learned during his years tracking outlaws served him well on the bench, where his reputation for fairness and insight earned him the respect of lawmen and citizens alike. As their children grew, Grace and Cole made certain they understood the values that had shaped their parents' lives: courage, compassion, and commitment to doing what was right, no matter the cost. They shared the story of their meeting at the creek many times, each telling reinforcing the truth that love often arrives when least expected and in the most unlikely circumstances. On their 25th wedding anniversary in 1904, surrounded by their children's spouses, and 5 grandchildren, Cole raised a toast to the woman who had changed his life. "To Grace," he said, his blue eyes still bright with love after all their years together, "who crawled through the creek and into my heart. Every day since has been a blessing beyond measure." Grace smiled at the man who had become her partner in all things, her love deepening with each passing year. "To Cole," she responded, "who reached down and said, 'I'll carry you out,' and has been carrying me ever since, through good times and bad, with strength and tenderness. My love, my life." As twilight fell over Cherry Creek, the sound of laughter and music drifted from the Ryder home, a testament to a love born in danger but nurtured in peace. A love that had created a legacy of service and compassion that would endure for generations to come.